At 10:13 anti-meridium in a packed room, Steve Jobs takes the stage for his major comeback. But he isn't smiling. His company is failing, and it's common knowledge. Apple only has a few weeks of cash left. Sales are plummeting, the stock is collapsing, and analysts are already talking about liquidation. Steve, on the other hand, stays calm and drops the bombshell. Apple is going to sign a strategic partnership with Microsoft. Silence. In the room, a giant screen lights up behind him, and there appears Bill Gates, the man all Apple fans hate. The rival, the gravedigger, the emperor of Windows. By the way, he immediately gets booed. And yet he's the one who's going to bring Apple out of its coma. $150 million, software, public support, and a pack that no one could have imagined. But what no one knows that day is that Bill Gates isn't doing this to save Apple. So why Microsoft, at the height of its power? Did he support his biggest rival? More importantly, how did this rescue change global business history? Hi, Team Mindset. I hope you're doing well. Today, we're going to tell you a story that even most Apple fans don't know. A wild tale of a plea for aid, an unexpected alliance, and treachery. A brilliant strategic move, worthy of the greatest economic thrillers. As usual, we'll end with the business lessons from this story. I can assure you they're truly juicy. Let's begin. The offices are silent as the employees have lost faith. This might be difficult to fathom for anyone born post-2000. But after ruling over innovation, Apple has become a ship that's slowly but surely taking on water. Back then, the brand solely produced computers with no iPhone, iPod, or Magic yet. Most importantly, it is incompatible with the surrounding world. While Windows is installed on 9 out of 10 PCs, Macs are just a niche choice, incompatible with most professional software. Developers and companies are abandoning Apple, and customers are wary. In 1996, Apple lost over $1 billion. In 1997, there were only 90 days of cash left in the bank. The stock drops below $3. The once pioneering tech company is now valued at less than $3 billion, and Steve Jobs is no longer with the company. He was fired by his own board 12 years prior. One day we should discuss the incredible story of Apple's creation. Let me know if you're interested. Since he left, Apple has had one failure after another, out-of-touch CEOs and failed products. The brand has become a soulless, visionless monument. But in February 1997, a small miracle happened. Apple bought a startup called Next, and with it, brought Steve Jobs back home. But even he won't be able to do anything without a colossal boost. In the summer of 1997, Apple was on the brink of collapse. Unexpectedly, its biggest competitor decided to lend a helping hand. But you don't suspect it's just for charity, do you? The atmosphere is electric. It's the big comeback of Steve Jobs, in the flesh and in black. He's not yet wearing his famous blue jeans and turtleneck sweater, but he steps onto the stage with a determined look. Everyone is expecting a strong statement. Maybe a new product, a recovery plan? But no one, absolutely no one, is ready for what he's about to say.
I'd like to announce today one of our first partnerships, a very, very important partnership. It's with Microsoft.
I see silence, then boos. On the giant screen behind him, the face of Bill Gates appears, floating like a digital big brother above the crowd. At that moment, the audience is completely lost. It's like Coca-Cola announcing a merger with Pepsi, like McDonald's starting to sell Whoppers. The man whom the entire Apple community considers the ultimate enemy becomes the official savior of the company with the Apple logo. Microsoft publicly pledges to invest $150 million in Apple. But be careful, these aren't regular shares, they're non-voting shares. Microsoft doesn't aim to control Apple, but rather help it survive, among other goals. Bill Gates also promises to keep the Microsoft Office suite on Mac for 5 years. And for all the pros, the students, the creatives, it's a survival move, because in 1997, a Mac without Word, Excel, and PowerPoint is an unsellable Mac. And to complete the humiliation, Apple even accepts a huge concession. Internet Explorer becomes the default browser for Mac operating system. Yes, you heard that right. The company, which had denounced Microsoft's monopoly for years, gives Internet Explorer a very important person spot on its machines. At first, it looks like a live surrender. But in reality, it's much more strategic than that. This deal signed between two sworn enemies is anything but an act of charity. It's a cold, calculated chess move. Because Bill Gates, at that moment, doesn't need to save Apple. What he's trying to save is Microsoft and himself. And you'll quickly understand. Within the United States Department of Justice, or Department of Justice, an investigation is underway. Discreet but explosive, it targets Microsoft, and, more specifically, the absolute domination of Windows on computers around the world. Since 1993, antitrust authorities have accused Microsoft of monopolizing the market. Windows is installed on more than 90% of the world's PCs, and Microsoft uses it to push its other products. Internet Explorer, Office, Microsoft Network. Behind the scenes, the threat is growing. The word breakup is starting to circulate. Bill Gates isn't naive. He knows his empire is on the line. He recognizes a crucial point. A monopoly cannot thrive without credible competition. But at that moment, Apple was on the verge of bankruptcy. Linux is marginal, and International Business Machine Sun, and Compaq all rely on Windows. A story that I really want to tell you, by the way, is that of International Business Machines. But anyway, to warn, Microsoft no longer has any visible rivals. Apple's death would give the Department of Justice a strong case against Microsoft. If Apple survives, Microsoft can argue the market is free. It all becomes clear. The $150 million investment in Apple, the support for Office on Mac, and Gates emerging as a strategic partner. All of that, it's not philanthropy, it's a political act, a defensive calculation. Bill Gates saves Apple so he can later say he's not a tyrant, and it works. Less than a year after this deal, Gates is summoned for a 3-day deposition. He arrives ready, evasive, and wary. Denying everything, he manipulates definitions and evades traps.
That falls under the activity you just described. I don't know what you mean by that. You don't know? No, I'm not sure.
Above all, he reminds us that Microsoft works with Apple and that competition exists. If you understand English, I recommend watching the video linked in the description. It's quite surreal. This line of defense will be very influential. In 2000, a judge ordered Microsoft's breakup, but after appeals and negotiations, the company avoided it. No breakup, no major sanctions, just a few restrictions and temporary oversight. Basically, a slap on the wrist. The goal was achieved. Gates's 1997 gesture cost $150 million, but saved Microsoft and himself tens of billions. Six years have passed since the deal. Apple survived. More than that, Apple is starting to come back to life. Steve Jobs' return transformed Apple, making design central once more. Mac OS X won over creatives, and the iPod broke records. Apple's stock began to climb steadily. At that moment, Microsoft decides to sell all its shares. They had been bought 6 years earlier at $8.25 each and represented nearly 6% of the company. In 2003, they were sold for around $550 million, representing a 3.6x return on the initial investment. While impressive, it pales in comparison to the value those shares would hold today. From 2003 onward, Apple's growth skyrocketed. In 2007, the iPhone changed the world. In 2010, the iPad redefined the tablet. In 2011, Apple became the world's most valuable company. The stock price surged over 400 times, prompting the company to split it in half, and then by 7 to manage the high price. The stock split makes the shares more accessible to small investors, as the price becomes too high for the general public when it keeps rising. However, the total value remains unchanged. It's like cutting a pizza. You have more slices, but not more pizzas. You're likely wondering what would have happened if Microsoft held on to its shares. It's straightforward. Today, those shares would total over $250 million with their 2025 value. More than $200 billion. Yes, $200 billion. Bill Gates missed out on the biggest jackpot in tech history. But in my view, it doesn't make him lose sleep. He wouldn't have refused a few more billion, but in return, he secured Microsoft's survival. He didn't make 400x his money, but maintained his empire. And even today, Microsoft remains in the global top 3 after experiencing a few rough patches. Still, as I mentioned to you in a video some time ago. But as you know, that's not the end of the story. Because by saving Apple, Bill Gates also awakened a monster. And in the years that followed, this small competitor saved out of charity would become Microsoft's #1 rival. In a dark room, Steve Jobs walks onto the stage. He takes a tiny object out of his pocket and says this legendary phrase.
Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone.
With the iPhone's release, Apple revolutionized the industry, catching Microsoft off guard. While Apple continues to innovate, Microsoft stumbles with Windows Vista, soon in Windows Phone. Bill Gates thought he was saving a rival by rescuing the slow, rigid, and bureaucratic Apple. In the end, he awakened the greatest innovator of the 21st century. Apple became the most admired, the most copied, and the most profitable company in the world. It outshined Microsoft in value, dominated in mobile, and made it seem outdated in the public perception. And in the ultimate irony, the world is starting to forget that Microsoft saved Apple. To younger generations, Bill Gates is seen as an old philanthropist, while Steve Jobs is viewed as an iconic genius legend. Yet without Bill Gates, Jobs would never have had the stage. Without Microsoft, Apple would have been liquidated in '97. But that's business. Microsoft and Apple, two of the world's most powerful companies, have a history filled with backstabbing, mutual assistance, and strategic maneuvering. But tell me, what would you have done in Gates's place? Would you have let Apple die, or would you have watered it to better protect yourself? Finish? If you have a business, the key takeaway is that your biggest competitor can sometimes become your greatest partner. Not because you like each other, but because at that precise moment, your interests align. Apple and Microsoft, historic rivals, require each other. One needs a check, the other a competitor. It's not an alliance, it's a survival deal. And that was enough to change history. The moral is that in business, never reject someone just because they're your competitor. He can be your leverage, shield, or escape. The second lesson, you must know how to swallow your pride. Steve Jobs publicly reached out to Bill Gates on stage before a crowd eager to see Gates humiliated. Not because he was weak, but because he was clear-headed. He knew that without this agreement, Apple would die within 3 months. And instead of letting his ego decide, he did what very few founders are capable of doing, choosing the future of the company over his own pride. The moral is that in critical moments, arrogance has no place. What matters is not your ego, but what you save. The third and final lesson is that in business, you may need to choose between losing a battle or the war. Bill Gates could have let Apple die as he had won, and Apple was down. However, doing so would have confirmed to the world that Microsoft was a monopoly. So, he chose to lose a round in order not to lose the game. The moral is, you can't win everything, but you can choose what you lose. And sometimes, real strategy is about giving up a little ground so you never leave the map. So be strategic, be bold. Just like Microsoft, when they launched Microsoft Network Messenger, by literally copying a competitor to become the leader in instant messaging, before completely losing their footing. Because of Apple in particular, as you can see in the video that's showing,